At midnight, on a lonely Nevada highway, flames lit up the canyon walls. A car had gone off the road. Minutes later, the thunder of engines shattered the silence as a group of leather-clad bikers pulled over. Inside the wreck, a young mother was bleeding, trapped, whispering one name again and again. "Luke! My son! Where's my Luke?" Her trembling hand pointed towards the darkness. They took him. Then Rook, a battle-scarred German shepherd, began to sniff the air, growling low before barking fiercely toward the highway, where a faint trail of blood disappeared into the night. Cole Briggs, the leader of the bikers, followed the dog's gaze, his jaw tightening. This wasn't an accident. It was a message. What happened next would send them on a chase through the desert, a ride into fire, dust, and the truth no one was meant to find. Before we dive into this story, tell me where you're watching from. The US, Canada, Australia, or somewhere else? I want to see how far Biker's story travels tonight. The desert wind cut through the Nevada night like shards of glass, carrying the dry scent of sagebrush and gasoline. It was past midnight when the shepherds rode the empty highway, 4 motorcycles slicing through the dark, their headlights glowing like comets in a sea of dust. They were veterans turned wanderers, bound not by war anymore, but by the silent duty of protecting those forgotten by the world. Leading them was Cole Briggs, a man in his early 40s, tall and broad-shouldered, his face carved with the kind of lines only war and loss could etch. His beard was trimmed close, but grayed around the edges, framing a jaw set in permanent vigilance. His eyes, steel blue and sharp, had seen too much to ever truly rest. Once a K-9 handler in Afghanistan, Cole had led a team that specialized in tracking insurgents through desert ruins. A roadside bomb had ended that mission, and most of his platoon. Only he and his dog had survived. That dog, Rook, now riding in a custom-built sidecar beside him, was no longer the young military shepherd he once was. The dog's coat was mottled gray and tan, his muzzle silvering with age, yet his gaze remained alert, yellow eyes reflecting the road's dim light like twin lanterns in the dark. The night was calm until Rook lifted his head. A low growl rumbled through his chest. Cole frowned and slowed down, the rest of the shepherds following his cue. Diesel, the mechanic of the group, short and thick as an engine block, muttered something under his breath. His hands were perpetually blackened with grease, his jacket stitched with patches from a dozen broken bikes, and half as many broken hearts. Behind him, Red, the only woman in the group, adjusted her bandana. Her crimson hair caught the faint starlight, and her green eyes narrowed beneath the brim of her helmet. She had once been a combat medic. Now, her calm voice could still a crowd or a wound alike. The last rider, Hammer, tall and lean, kept quiet, scanning the road's shoulder with the instinct of a man who never truly left the battlefield. "What is it, boy?" Cole murmured, pulling his Harley to the side. Rook jumped down from the sidecar, sniffing the air, ears perked. Then came the sound, metal on rock, faint but distinct. Cole's stomach tightened. Somewhere down the canyon below, something or someone had crashed. The shepherds parked their bikes, the engines dying into silence. Only the wind spoke now. Cole grabbed a flashlight from his saddlebag, its beam slicing the darkness. He motioned to the others, and together they climbed down the rocky slope. The air was sharp, heavy with the tang of oil and burning rubber. The beam caught a twisted hunk of metal below. A car flipped on its roof, its hood steaming. Cole's boots slid against loose gravel as he descended. "Red, bring the med kit!" he shouted. Rook barked once, already sprinting ahead, his paws scattering pebbles down the incline. When they reached the wreck, The Baita world seemed to shrink to the sound of crackling fire and the desperate hiss of a leaking radiator. Cole knelt beside the driver's side. Inside, glass glittered across the seats like frost. A woman lay slumped over the steering wheel, blood streaking her temple. Her hair, once a deep auburn, was now matted with dust and blood. Her right hand still clutched the steering column, knuckles white even in unconsciousness. "Ma'am?" Cole's voice softened as he checked her pulse, weak but steady. "Red, she's alive." Red crouched beside him, her gloved hands already working with calm precision. "Julia," the woman murmured suddenly, barely above a whisper. Her lips trembled as if trying to form another name. "Julia who?" Red asked gently, leaning closer, but the woman's voice broke into panic. "Luke, my son, they took him. He's only 12. Please." Her words fractured into sobs as shock took hold. Cole exchanged a quick look with Red. "She said, 'took him,'" he muttered. "Not, he's gone." Diesel stepped up, scanning the ground around the wreck. "Tire marks?" he grunted, pointing with his flashlight. "Truck tires, big ones, dual rear axles." He looked back at Cole. Someone rammed her off the road. Cole's jaw clenched. He glanced back at Julia, her skin pale beneath the dirt, freckles dusting her cheeks, eyes wide and haunted even through tears. She looked around 35, maybe younger, but exhaustion had aged her. Her hands trembled violently when Red tried to clean her wounds. "My boy," she whispered again, voice hollow. "They took him before the crash. They dragged him out." Cole felt the old, familiar burn rise in his chest, the one he hadn't felt since Afghanistan. The helplessness of hearing a scream you couldn't reach in time. He turned to Rook, who was pacing near the road, nose pressed to the dirt. "Find him, Rook," he said quietly. "Find the boy." The shepherd barked once and began tracing the tire tracks up toward the road. Cole followed with the flashlight, his boots crunching over broken glass. When he reached the highway, he saw them clearly now. Deep grooves in the asphalt, like the aftermath of a violent collision. Another set of tracks, heavier and heading north, disappeared into the night. He crouched beside them, running a gloved hand along the rubber marks. The direction, the pattern, it wasn't random. Whoever had done this knew how to make it look like an accident. But it wasn't. It was execution. Back below, Julia stirred again, her breathing shallow. Red covered her with a thermal blanket while Hammer and Diesel set up a small flare to signal any passing vehicles. But the highway remained deserted. Cole called out over the wind, "We need to get her out of here." Diesel frowned. "Hospital's 40 miles east. We'll lose hours." Cole's gaze hardened. "If those bastards took her son, every minute counts." He turned to Julia. "Ma'am, we're gonna take you to safety, okay? But I need you to tell me everything you remember. Who were they?" Julia's lips trembled. "A truck. White. No license plate. 2 men. One of them had a snake tattoo on his neck. I tried to fight, but they—" She winced as Red wrapped her arm. "They said if I screamed, they'd hurt Luke." Her voice broke again. "He was screaming for me when they drove off." Cole stood there in silence for a moment, watching the desert horizon where the truck had vanished. In his mind, memories flickered, of children crying in bombed villages, of helplessness carved into his bones. He clenched his fists until the leather of his gloves creaked. "Diesel," he said, voice low, "load her on your bike. Red, ride with her to Ely Hospital. Tell them it's a possible abduction. Hammer and I will follow those tracks." Red hesitated. "Cole, if this is what it looks like, it's bigger than us." "Then it's exactly our kind of fight," he replied. The desert swallowed the sound of engines as Red and Diesel roared east, Julia clinging weakly to Diesel's back. Cole and Hammer mounted their bikes, headlights carving twin paths through the darkness. Rook leapt into the sidecar, his ears whipping in the wind, eyes locked on the faint trail of dust ahead. As they rode, the world became a blur of black sand and silver moonlight. Cole's mind was a battlefield of thoughts, rage, guilt, a rising instinct that this was more than a kidnapping. There was precision in the attack, timing too perfect to be random. Hammer's voice came over the headset. "You think they knew her?" "I think they knew exactly who she was," Cole answered. "And they wanted the boy." "Why the kid?" "Maybe he saw something he wasn't supposed to." The highway stretched endlessly before them, a ribbon of darkness framed by jagged rocks. Somewhere ahead, the truck vanished into the labyrinth of canyons. Cole tightened his grip on the throttle, feeling the vibration of the engine beneath him. The familiar adrenaline surged, a rhythm he both hated and craved. It was the same rhythm that once kept him alive in foreign deserts. Now, it called him again. He looked down at Rook. The old dog's fur rippled in the wind, his eyes never leaving the horizon. "You ready, partner?" Rook barked once, deep and certain. When they reached the edge of a canyon turn, Cole stopped abruptly. The tracks ended at a bend, then split, one leading toward a service road, another disappearing into the sand. Whoever was driving had taken care to mask their path. Cole killed the engine, letting silence fall. The moon hung low, cold and watchful. Somewhere in that darkness was a child, terrified and alone. Cole's mind replayed Julia's trembling voice, her cracked plea. They took him before the crash. He looked at Hammer. "They'll move fast. Before sunrise, they'll be gone." Hammer nodded. "Then we find them before sunrise." Cole's gaze turned to the horizon. The desert stretched endlessly, a wasteland of secrets and buried sins. He felt Rook press his nose against his arm, as if sensing his turmoil. Cole reached down, stroking the old shepherd's head. "We've been here before, haven't we, buddy?" he whispered. "Different war, same evil." As they mounted the bikes again, the first light of dawn began to seep across the dunes, painting the sky with faint streaks of red. The road ahead looked infinite, merciless, but so was their resolve. Cole revved the engine, and the Harley growled like a beast awakened. The shepherds rode on, leaving behind the broken car, the smell of smoke, and the blood-stained sand. Ahead lay the hunt. And in the reflection of Cole's rear-view mirror, Rook's eyes glowed amber against the rising sun, steadfast, unwavering. The dog's gaze held the promise of pursuit, of protection, of justice yet to come. The shepherds had found their next mission. Dawn crawled slowly over the Nevada desert, staining the sky with a bruised purple light. The wind had died, leaving the air heavy with the smell of burned rubber and sand. Cole Briggs stood at the edge of the canyon road, his leather jacket still dusted with ash from the wreck. His Harley idled quietly beside him, a single stubborn growl against the silence. Down below, emergency lights flickered, red and blue halos spinning against the canyon walls. 2 police cruisers had arrived 20 minutes after Red's distress call. One of them was driven by Sheriff Dale Morgan, a man whose name Cole had heard whispered in truck stops and small-town diners across the state. Morgan was in his late 50s, tall and imposing, his belly pressing slightly against the buttons of his khaki uniform. His jaw was square, his hair iron gray and clipped short, but his eyes were small and sharp, like a coyote's, always watching, calculating. A faint scar ran along his right cheek, and when he smiled, which was rare, it twisted unevenly. Years of dealing with the worst of humanity had made him hard, but not just hardened, corroded. "Looks like a classic case of driver fatigue," Sheriff Morgan said, his tone brisk, almost rehearsed. He didn't look at Julia, who sat wrapped in a blanket near Red's bike, her face pale, her eyes distant. Road slick with sand. She must have drifted into the bend too fast. Cole's jaw tightened. She says someone rammed her. There are tire marks, truck size. Morgan turned, giving Cole a long, measured look. You're not from around here, son? Wasn't asking for geography, Cole replied. I'm talking about the physics of impact. You can see the scrape on her rear fender, consistent with a collision, not a skid. The sheriff's lips thinned, and for a brief second something flashed in his eyes. Annoyance, maybe fear, but it was gone as quickly as it came. We'll take care of it, he said finally, signaling to his deputy. The deputy, a young man named Ryan Colton, looked uneasy. Barely 25, his blonde hair stuck out from under his hat, and his uniform still looked new, creases sharp. He kept glancing from the wreck to Julia, then to Cole, as if silently pleading for someone to believe her story. Cole caught his gaze and held it for a moment. The kid looked honest, green, maybe too green for this county. Rook barked once, low and insistent. The dog was circling a patch of gravel a few yards from the guardrail, nose close to the ground. Cole followed, crouching beside him. There, just visible beneath the early light, were faint streaks of red. Blood. Tiny droplets leading away from the wreck, crossing the road and disappearing into the scrub. Cole's chest tightened. The height of the droplets suggested a child. He stood slowly and called out, "Sheriff, you might want to see this." Morgan ambled over, squinting as if the act of looking irritated him. He bent down, frowned briefly, then straightened. "Coyote drag marks," he said flatly. "You'll find those all over the desert." "Coyotes don't bleed human blood," Cole replied coldly. Morgan's gaze hardened. "You a detective now?" "I've seen more blood than you've seen sunrises," Cole said, his voice low, controlled. For a long moment, neither man spoke. The desert seemed to hold its breath. Then Morgan turned away, muttering, "Case closed. Get her to the hospital and let us handle the paperwork." Cole watched as the sheriff walked back to his cruiser, shoulders hunched, radio crackling on his belt. He felt the air shift, the subtle wrongness that every soldier learns to trust. Something was being buried here, and not just evidence. When Morgan drove off, his taillights fading into the morning haze, the younger deputy lingered. He approached Cole quietly, glancing over his shoulder. "Sir," he said, voice barely above a whisper. "For what it's worth, I believe her. The sheriff, he's been taking calls from people he shouldn't. Truckers, mostly. Private companies that move unusual cargo." He hesitated. "You didn't hear that from me?" Cole nodded. "What's your name, deputy?" "Ryan Colton." "Well, Ryan," Cole said, lowering his voice, "if anything happens to that evidence, if those tire tracks disappear, you call me." He handed the young man a metal card with the shepherd's insignia etched into it, a wolf's head surrounded by angel wings. "You'll reach me here." Ryan looked at the card as if it were a lifeline. "Yes, sir." Cole watched him leave, shoulders tense, then turned back to the wreck. Red and Diesel were preparing to transport Julia to the hospital. She was trembling, clutching her blanket as if it were a shield. When Cole crouched beside her, she looked at him with red-rimmed eyes. "They'll cover it up, won't they?" she asked, voice shaking. "Yes," Cole said honestly, "but not if I find your boy first." She blinked, tears brimming. "You believe me?" He nodded once. "I've seen that kind of fear before. It doesn't lie." Rook pressed his muzzle gently against her knee, and Julia reached out with a trembling hand to stroke his fur. He's beautiful, she whispered. Old, but strong. He's the smartest partner I've ever had, Cole said softly. He doesn't quit until the trail's cold. They rode east to the nearest hospital, a small facility on the edge of Ely, its parking lot half filled with dusty pickups. Inside, fluorescent lights hummed weakly. The nurse on duty, Nina Alvarez, was in her 40s, with olive skin and tired brown eyes that hinted at too many night shifts. She spoke with a gentle authority that made Julia relax for the first time. Looks like mild concussion. A few lacerations, Nina said after a quick exam. But she's in shock. She needs rest, and probably someone she trusts. Julia gripped Cole's hand. Please, she said, don't let them take him. They know where I live. They'll erase everything. Cole nodded. You're safe for now. Stay here with Red. I'll go back and follow the trail. Red looked up from the corner, her tone measured but worried. You're going alone? Just the dog and me, Cole replied. Less noise. Outside, the sun was climbing higher, the heat already shimmering off the asphalt. Rook padded beside him, tail low, nose twitching. Cole crouched, brushing a hand over the shepherd's fur. Find the scent again, he murmured. Rook's ears flicked once before he trotted ahead, nose to the ground, leading Cole back toward the canyon road. They stopped where the blood trail had ended. The dog circled twice, then veered north, toward the open desert. Cole followed, his boots crunching over dry brush. After a few hundred yards, they reached a patch of disturbed sand. Embedded deep were the faint impressions of heavy tires. Dual axles, just like Diesel had said. Cole crouched, tracing the pattern with his fingers. The prints headed toward an old service road that wound between the ridges. Then he found something else, small, half buried in the dirt. A fragment of fabric. Red cotton, torn, with a single cartoon rocket printed on it. A child's shirt. Luke's shirt. Cole's throat tightened. He slipped it into his jacket pocket, glancing toward the horizon. The service road stretched endlessly into the desert, vanishing behind a ridge of red rock. He turned back to Rook. We've got them, boy. Rook's tail flicked once, his gaze fierce. When Cole returned to the hospital later, the waiting room was quiet. Red sat with Julia, who was asleep, her face finally peaceful beneath a thin blanket. Diesel was talking with a man near the vending machine, a stocky figure in a trucker's jacket. Cole's eyes narrowed. The man was Bill Sutter, a local tow operator, in his 50s, with a sunburned neck and eyes that darted too quickly. You the one pulled the wreck from the canyon? Cole asked. Sutter nodded, shifting uneasily. Yeah, sheriff sent me. You touched the back of the car? Just hooked it up, that's all. He hesitated. But one of the sheriff's men was there first. Not the young deputy. The other one, dark hair, shaved head. He said to tow it straight to impound, no paperwork. Cole exchanged a look with Red. They're scrubbing the evidence already. Sutter swallowed hard. Listen, mister, I just do what I'm told. But if you're going after them, watch your back. Morgan runs this county. He's got eyes everywhere. Cole thanked him, then stepped outside, the afternoon sun blinding. He looked toward the endless horizon again, the same direction the tracks had led. Somewhere out there was a boy, scared and alone, and behind that boy, a machine built on greed and silence. Cole mounted his Harley, Rook jumping into the sidecar. He started the engine, its roar breaking the still air. They think they buried this, he muttered. Let's go dig it up. The shepherds would not wait for permission. They never had. Night had fallen again over the Nevada flats. The kind of night that made the desert seem infinite and alive with whispers. The shepherds were gathered in an old roadside diner that hadn't seen a crowd in years. The place smelled faintly of burnt coffee and oil, its neon sign flickering in the window like a dying heartbeat. It was their makeshift command post now. A single laptop sat open on the table between them, cables snaking across greasy plates. The screen's glow lit up Diesel's face as he typed furiously, sweat glinting on his temple despite the cool air. Diesel was in his 40s, short and built like a compact tank, his hands permanently scarred from years in garages and battlefields alike. The left side of his neck bore an old burn mark from a motorcycle crash, a jagged line that climbed toward his jaw. He wasn't a man of many words, but when he worked, every keystroke sounded like a promise. "Traffic cam network's garbage," he muttered. "Half these county cameras haven't been updated since '09, but the ones near Route 47 still ping a signal." Cole stood behind him, arms crossed. The overhead light carved sharp planes across his face. The tired soldier, the wary leader. He hadn't slept in 36 hours. Red sat opposite, scrolling through medical records on her tablet. Rook lay between them, head on his paws, eyes flicking open whenever someone raised their voice. Julia sat quietly near the window, her hospital band still on her wrist. The bandaged cut across her forehead made her look fragile, but her eyes were no longer vacant. They were sharpened by grief and a simmering anger. She stared at the desert outside, as though she could see her son's shadow moving across the sand. When she finally spoke, her voice was steady. "They won't keep him far. Luke has a tracker in his wristband. His father gave it to him before he passed." Cole looked at her. "The one with the GPS chip?" She nodded. "Yes, but it's been disabled. Whoever took him knew what they were doing." Diesel stopped typing long enough to grunt. "Then we spoof their signal. Old-fashioned military tracking. I can bounce through the Department of Transportation network. Cross-check with the cell towers. Might find the ghost trail." Cole placed a hand on Diesel's shoulder. "Do it." The screen flickered as Diesel's fingers danced across the keys. Lines of code scrolled like green rain. A map appeared, a scatter of dots stretching north. One blinked brighter than the rest. "There," he said. "Mile marker 217, near the service road to an old storage facility. Nothing but sand and rust out there." Julia's face drained of color. "I know that place," she whispered. "They called it the Basin. When I worked for Westland Construction, I found payments to that site, coded as equipment housing. But there was no project there, just that warehouse. They kept people there, I think, before they moved them." Cole met her gaze. "You've been inside?" "Once," she said, trembling. "I was taken there for a night after I asked questions. They blindfolded me, but I remember the sound. Metal doors, chains, and the smell of bleach. There were voices, children crying. I escaped before they realized I knew too much." Red exhaled slowly, setting her tablet down. "So, the sheriff's covering for them." "Not just covering," Cole said. "He's part of it." Diesel leaned back, cracking his knuckles. "Coordinates locked. I'll send them to your HUD scanner." Cole nodded, grabbing his worn military device from the saddlebag. The screen hummed to life, its dull green glow like a heartbeat in his palm. "Then we move at dawn." But Rook lifted his head suddenly, ears pricking. A low growl vibrated through his chest. Seconds later, headlights flashed outside the diner, 2 cars pulling into the lot. Cole's instincts flared. "Kill the lights," he ordered. Diesel hit the switch. The room sank into darkness. Through the blinds, Cole saw 2 men step out of the lead car. They weren't locals. Too clean, too precise. Both wore dark suits despite the desert heat. The driver was tall, broad-shouldered, with slicked back hair and a gold watch that glinted under the neon. The other was leaner, his jaw sharp, his movements deliberate. They scanned the lot before heading toward the diner's door. Red whispered, "Agents?" Cole shook his head. "Not the kind that ask questions." The taller man entered first. He had the easy arrogance of someone used to power. "Evening," he said, flashing a toothy grin that didn't reach his eyes. "Name's Cal Reddick, state investigator. Sheriff Morgan sent us to collect statements." His voice was smooth, but his gaze was already assessing the room. The laptop, the bandaged woman, the dog. Cole didn't move. "We already gave statements." Reddick's partner, a wiry man with a crooked nose and pale, restless eyes, stepped closer. "Funny," he said, voice raspy. "The sheriff said you might be reluctant." Rook growled, rising to his feet. Cole's hand brushed the side of his jacket, just enough to show the handle of his pistol. "We don't take kindly to unannounced guests." For a moment, the diner hung in tension. Then Reddick smiled again, backing away slowly. "Relax, soldier. We're all on the same side." He slipped a card onto the counter. "If you find anything unusual, call that number." When the men left, their taillights vanished into the desert, leaving the smell of dust and lies behind. Julia exhaled shakily. "They know." Cole pocketed the card, glancing at the printed number. "It's fake," he said flatly. "They're not investigators, they're cleanup." Red crossed her arms. "So what now?" Cole's eyes met hers. "Now we find Luke before he disappears into whatever hell those men run." By dawn, the shepherds were on the road again. The highway was a ribbon of pale gold under the rising sun. Rook rode beside Cole in the sidecar, nose in the wind, eyes fixed ahead. Julia followed in the van they'd borrowed from Diesel's shop, her hands trembling on the wheel but determination anchoring her. They reached the service road before noon. The desert stretched endlessly around them, silent except for the wind. Ahead, behind a ridge of red rock, stood a cluster of decaying warehouses, sheet metal buildings eaten by rust and silence. Diesel parked, scanning the area through binoculars. "No movement. Looks abandoned." "Abandoned places make the best hiding spots," Cole said. He dismounted, checking his weapon. "Rook, track." The shepherd leapt down, nose sweeping the ground. After a few seconds, he barked once, moving toward a set of tire tracks half buried in sand. The prints were fresh, maybe a day old. Cole followed, pulse quickening. They rounded the first warehouse. A faded sign read Westland Storage Facility. The door was padlocked, but the chain was new, gleaming under the sun. Diesel knelt, pulling a small crowbar from his pack. "Give me 30 seconds." The metal snapped with a dull clang. The door groaned open, exhaling a cloud of stale air. Inside, shafts of light pierced through holes in the ceiling, illuminating dust motes that drifted like ghosts. The room smelled of bleach, rust, and despair. Julia froze at the threshold. "This is it," she whispered. "This is where they took me." Rook moved ahead cautiously, nose twitching. His tail stiffened. Then he began to bark, loud and sharp. Cole sprinted forward. In the corner of the warehouse, hidden under a tarp, was a metal cage, empty, but smeared with dried blood. A child's sneaker lay beside it, half covered in dust. Cole picked it up, his hands trembling. Julia's knees buckled. Red caught her just as she began to sob. "He was here," she whispered. "He was here." Cole swallowed hard. "And we're close." Behind them, the radio in Diesel's pocket crackled. He frowned and pulled it out. "You're not going to like this," he said. "We've got company." Through the broken window, Cole saw a plume of dust rising from the main road. 3 black SUVs speeding towards the warehouse. Cole's expression hardened. "They're not giving us time to think." He turned to Julia. "Get back to the van. When I say go, you drive west. Don't look back." "What about you?" she asked, voice shaking. "We'll hold them off." He looked at Rook, who stood ready, fur bristling. The old shepherd growled, low and deep, the sound of loyalty sharpened into fury. As the vehicles drew closer, Cole whispered, "Stay with me, boy." The desert wind howled again, carrying the first echoes of engines and gunmetal into the light. The sun had begun its slow descent behind the Nevada hills, throwing long copper shadows over the desert floor. The air shimmered with heat that hadn't yet bled from the day, and the sand carried the scent of dust and gasoline. Cole Briggs crouched behind the shattered remains of a fence, his rifle balanced on one knee. Through his binoculars, he watched the warehouse they'd scouted earlier that morning, now silent, its rusted frame glowing orange under the dying light. It looked abandoned again, like it had swallowed every secret back into its metal bones. Beside him, Red adjusted the scope of her rifle, her crimson hair tucked beneath a black cap. Her calm eyes reflected the horizon, sharp and patient. She had been a combat medic before the war had worn her down, and though her hands still carried the tenderness of a healer, her trigger finger had learned precision long ago. "No movement since those SUVs left," she murmured. "You think they're gone?" Cole shook his head. "No one walks away from a crime scene that dirty. They're waiting." Behind them, Diesel was wiring a small surveillance drone on the hood of his bike. The device, a battered relic from his Army engineer days, buzzed to life with a faint whine. Diesel's scarred hands worked with mechanical certainty. "Drone's online," he said. "Infrared shows heat signatures inside. 4 bodies. One's pacing near the back door." Cole narrowed his eyes. "Armed?" "Hard to tell from this distance, but I'd bet my last tank of gas on it." From the other side of the ridge, Julia waited in the van, biting her lip until it bled. Her dark auburn hair was tied back messily, her knuckles white around the steering wheel. She wanted to run inside, to tear down the walls until she found her son, but Cole's words echoed in her head. "If they see you, it's over." She looked down at Rook, who sat beside her seat, eyes locked on the warehouse. The shepherd's tail didn't move. His body was still as stone, waiting for Cole's command. The radio in Cole's vest crackled softly. It was Diesel. "Boss, we've got headlights incoming. 2 vehicles. Military-grade engines." Cole's muscles tensed. "Positions." Within seconds, the shepherds melted into the landscape, Red crouching low behind a sand dune, Diesel shifting his drone's feed to his wrist monitor, Cole leveling his rifle at the road. The first vehicle came into view, a matte black SUV kicking up clouds of grit, followed by a pickup truck with covered crates in the back. When they stopped near the warehouse, men spilled out, armed and efficient. And then Cole saw him. Sheriff Dale Morgan stepped out of the SUV like he owned the desert. The setting sun glinted off his badge, but there was no law in the man's eyes. Only the cold calm of someone who had long forgotten what justice meant. His uniform was pristine, but the way he moved was military, precise. Cole realized with a sinking feeling that this wasn't just corruption, it was coordination. Morgan wasn't covering for them. He was them. Morgan barked orders to the men unloading the crates. His voice carried through the dry air. "Move quick. The feds are sniffing around again. Reddick says we've got less than a day to clear this place out." Red's voice came through the earpiece. "You hear that? He's cleaning house." Cole's eyes narrowed. "And taking the evidence with him." Morgan turned toward one of the men, broad, tattooed, face half hidden under a ball cap. "What about the kid?" the man asked. The sheriff smirked. "Safe and quiet. The buyers want him breathing, not bruised." Cole's stomach knotted. His finger twitched on the trigger. But before he could act, Diesel hissed over the radio. "Boss, we've got movement behind us." Cole spun just as a flashlight beam cut through the dust. Men were closing in from the ridge, at least 6 of them, dressed in desert camo. Ambush. "Down!" Cole shouted. The first bullet hissed past his ear, kicking sand into the air. Red returned fire instantly, her rifle cracking in rhythm. Diesel ducked behind the van, pulling Julia down. Rook leapt out, barking furiously, his growl echoing across the rocks. The firefight erupted fast and brutal. Cole's shots found 2 of the attackers, but more poured in from the east. The desert exploded in muzzle flashes and echoing thunder. Julia crouched low behind the wheel, covering her ears. "Cole!" she screamed. "I'm here!" he shouted back, sliding behind a boulder. His pulse hammered in his temples. Morgan's men were better trained than thugs. They moved with military discipline, cutting angles, suppressing fire. It was a trap designed for soldiers, not bikers. Red shouted, "We're pinned!" Diesel's drone still hovered overhead, its feed flickering between static and silhouettes. He gritted his teeth, rewired the control, and dove it straight into one of the SUVs. The explosion tore through the night, a ball of fire blooming against the dark. The shockwave sent sand flying in all directions. Cole used the distraction to advance, firing 3 precise shots. One hit a gunman square in the chest, another dropped to his knees. Rook lunged at a third, his powerful jaws clamping down on the man's arm. The scream was short and sharp, but when the smoke cleared, Morgan was gone. Cole scanned the burning wrecks, fury surging through his veins. He ran! Diesel limped toward him, a graze on his arm bleeding through his jacket. He took the pickup. "The crates are gone too." Red caught her breath beside them. "He planned this, the whole ambush." Cole clenched his fists. "He wanted us dead. Now he knows we're hunting him." From the shadows, Rook trotted up, something clamped gently in his teeth. Cole knelt as the shepherd, dropped it into his palm, a torn piece of red cotton, faded cartoon rockets, the same pattern as the shirt Luke had worn in the photo Julia kept. "He's alive," Cole whispered. Julia stumbled toward them, face streaked with tears and dirt. When she saw the fabric, her knees gave out. Red caught her before she fell. "You found him?" she asked, voice trembling. "Not yet," Cole said, his tone fierce but steady. "But this proves he's still breathing." Diesel looked at the horizon, where the sheriff's taillights had disappeared into the dark. "He's heading east," he said, "toward the old freight routes." Cole nodded. "Then we move before he reaches cover." He pulled out his encrypted radio, flipping to a frequency he hadn't used in years. Static filled the line, then a voice answered, a calm, older voice with a faint southern drawl. "Briggs, is that really you?" "It's been a long time, Sam," Cole said. "I need a favor." Agent Samuel Ortiz, a Federal Security Bureau operative, had once served with Cole during his K-9 deployment. He was a man in his 50s, tall, thin, with salt and pepper hair, and the weary posture of someone who'd seen too many secrets rot from the inside. Cole trusted him with exactly one thing: the truth. Cole spoke quickly. "I've got proof of a trafficking network operating out of Westland Construction. Local law's in on it, Sheriff Dale Morgan. I need a satellite trace on a pickup heading east from Ely County now." Ortiz hesitated. "Briggs, if this is what I think it is, you're stepping into a political minefield. These people have protection all the way up." "I don't care who protects them. A kid's life is on the line." Ortiz sighed heavily. "Send me your coordinates. I'll get what I can. But keep your head down. You won't be the only one hunting tonight." The line went dead. Cole looked up at his team. Red was cleaning her weapon. Diesel was patching his arm with duct tape and gauze. Julia sat beside Rook, her hand resting on his fur, whispering prayers into the night. The wind picked up, scattering embers from the burning SUV across the sand. Cole's gaze hardened. They tried to bury the truth. Now we dig them up, one grave at a time. Rook looked up at him, tail low but eyes bright, waiting for the next command. Cole rested a hand on the shepherd's head. "Tonight we finish this, partner." Far in the distance, thunder rolled, not from the sky but from engines roaring across the desert, heralding the battle yet to come. The night was bone-dry and breathless. The desert stretched beneath a thin sliver of moon that hung like a blade in the black. Wind hissed across the dunes, dragging fine ribbons of sand that shimmered faintly in the light of distant headlights. Then came the growl of engines, low, rhythmic, like thunder rolling in the belly of the earth. The shepherds were moving. Cole Briggs led the convoy, his Harley gleaming with dust and blood-red light. Behind him, a dozen bikes fanned out in formation, their chrome flashing as they tore across the flats. Red rode to his left, her hair whipping from beneath her helmet like a crimson banner. Diesel followed close, carrying a crate of weapons lashed to the back of his bike. Julia rode in the rear with two others in a black van, her pale face set with determination. Nothing would keep her from her son tonight. Cole's voice came over the comms, steady but cold. "We hit the perimeter at 2300. No hero moves. Red, you and Diesel cover the west flank. Julia stays in the van until I signal." Julia's voice crackled back, sharp and anxious. "You can't keep me out, Cole. He's my boy." Cole hesitated before answering. "Then stay behind me. If I fall, you drive like hell and don't look back." The shepherds crested a ridge, and there it was. The compound. Half a mile of corrugated metal walls and cargo containers arranged in rows like tombs, their edges lit by halogen lamps. Armed guards patrolled the fence line. The flicker of a campfire burned near the center, casting silhouettes that moved like ghosts. Rook growled softly in the sidecar, his gray fur bristling under the wind. The old shepherd's ears twitched, catching sounds no human could. His scars gleamed faintly in the moonlight, a veteran of battles both human and otherwise. Cole leaned down and murmured, "Find the boy, partner. You lead tonight." The dog whined low, then leapt from the sidecar as they neared the fence. Diesel pulled up beside Cole. "You sure about this, boss? Looks like 30, maybe 40 hostiles. We're outnumbered 5-1. Cole revved the throttle. "We've been outnumbered before." He pointed toward the warehouse. "That's where they keep the containers. Luke's inside one of them." Rook was already ahead, weaving between rusted barrels and broken fencing, his nose to the ground. When the shepherd stopped suddenly and barked twice, Cole knew he'd found something. Through the scope of his rifle, he saw a silver container marked C-12. Julia's heart hammered as she climbed from the van, ignoring Red's warning hand. She stumbled through the sand toward Cole, her hospital band still tight on her wrist, her boots kicking up small clouds of dust. "That's it," she said breathlessly. "That's where they kept me before." Cole turned, about to answer, and then the air split with the sound of a klaxon. A red beacon on the nearest watchtower began to spin. Floodlights blazed to life. Shouts erupted from every direction. "Ambush!" Diesel roared. Gunfire cracked across the compound. Bullets tore through sand and metal. The shepherds scattered, bikes swerving into cover. Diesel grabbed his rifle, firing back at the tower. Red ducked behind a truck, laying down precision shots that dropped 2 men before they could reload. Cole grabbed Julia by the arm and dragged her behind a stack of crates. "Stay down!" "They'll kill him!" she screamed. "Not if we get to him first!" Through the chaos, Rook darted toward the container. The shepherd's paws barely touched the ground as he ran, a blur of fur and fury. He reached the steel door and began clawing at it, barking frantically. Inside came a faint cry, muffled, small. "Luke!" Julia's voice broke as she ran. Cole fired at the lock, the metal sparking under each shot. On the third hit, it snapped. He kicked the door open, and a wave of hot air and darkness spilled out. The smell was suffocating, oil, sweat, and blood. A boy sat huddled in the corner, bound at the wrists, his hair matted with dirt. His wide green eyes blinked against the light. "Mom?" he whispered. Julia fell to her knees, gathering him into her arms, sobbing into his hair, but the reunion was cut short. From the watchtower, a rifleman shouted, "They've got the package!" Cole looked up just in time to see muzzle flashes. "Down!" he yelled. Rook moved first. The shepherd lunged across the space between them, colliding with Julia and Luke just as the bullet tore through the air. The sound was like a hammer striking bone. Rook yelped, once, then fell still, his body shielding the boy. Cole's world narrowed to a heartbeat. He spun toward the tower, rage igniting every nerve. He spotted the shooter, one of Morgan's men, and fired 3 times. The guard dropped, his weapon clattering against the railing. Red's voice came through the comms. "Cole, incoming from the east, SUVs!" He glanced at Julia, who was clutching Luke, shaking uncontrollably beside Rook's motionless body. "Take him to the van," Cole said hoarsely. "No, not without— Go!" His shout cut through the gunfire. "He didn't die for nothing. Move!" She stumbled back, dragging Luke toward the van. Diesel covered them, his machine gun chattering. The other shepherds formed a perimeter, their engines revving to drown out the screams. Cole reloaded and turned toward the open desert. Through the smoke, he saw movement, a figure stepping from the shadows. Sheriff Dale Morgan. His uniform was gone, replaced by tactical armor and a desert scarf. His face glistened with sweat, and in his hand was a pistol already raised. "You should have stayed out of this, Briggs," he said, voice calm and cruel. "You and that mutt just cost me millions." Cole's finger tightened on the trigger. "You're done, Dale." Morgan laughed, softly. "No one's ever done with me." He fired first, a clean, fast shot. It grazed Cole's arm, spinning him back. Pain flared, but Cole didn't drop. He aimed, steadying his breath, and fired once more. The bullet caught Morgan square in the chest. The sheriff staggered, eyes wide, disbelief etched across his face before he collapsed into the sand. The sound of engines roared behind them, Julia's van speeding toward the open desert. Red's bike followed close, Diesel's headlights cutting through the smoke. Cole knelt beside Rook, his hands trembling. The old shepherd lay still, his chest rising shallowly, fur dark with blood. Cole placed a hand on his head, whispering, "You did good, boy. You brought him home." Rook's eyes fluttered once, the faintest flicker of light, then closed forever. The wind shifted, carrying the scent of burning oil and sand. Above them, the moon slipped behind a veil of cloud, leaving only the glow of fire to mark the battlefield. Cole stayed kneeling until Red's voice broke the silence. "We have to go." He rose slowly, wiping the blood from his hands onto his jeans. Behind him, the compound burned, flames swallowing the containers, consuming the evidence and the ghosts alike. As they rode away into the night, the desert glowed red behind them, a funeral pyre for the fallen, and for the dog who had given everything. The first light of dawn crept over the Nevada horizon, soft and golden, spilling across the smoldering wreckage of the desert compound. Smoke still coiled into the sky like dying ghosts. The air was heavy with the scent of gunpowder and scorched metal, a bitter reminder of the night's battle. Cole Briggs stood unsteadily amid the ruins, his right arm wrapped in a bloodied bandage. His once black jacket was torn and charred, streaked with desert dust and crimson. His eyes, though rimmed with exhaustion, still burned with that stubborn fire. The same look that had carried him through war zones, through loss, through every fight that should have ended him. Behind him, the wail of approaching sirens cut through the stillness. Blue and red lights flickered faintly against the sunrise as federal vehicles tore across the sand. The reinforcements had finally arrived. From the first SUV stepped Agent Samuel Ortiz, tall and lean, his salt and pepper hair matted from the long drive. He wore a tactical vest over his plain gray shirt, and his face was lined with both fatigue and quiet fury. Ortiz had once been a soldier like Cole, before bureaucracy chained him to a desk. But that old grit still lived in him. He scanned the devastation, jaw tight. Jesus Christ, Cole, you turned the desert into a war zone! Cole gave a weary half-smile. Guess the paperwork's gonna be hell. Ortiz sighed, glancing around at the bodies being zip-tied and hauled into custody. You could have waited for us. I did, Cole said. Just didn't wait long enough. Ortiz shook his head, but there was something close to admiration in his eyes. Behind them, black-clad agents swarmed the compound, cutting chains and prying open locked containers. One by one, frightened children emerged, thin, dirty, trembling. Some cried quietly, others just stared, hollow-eyed. A medic called out, "We've got at least 23 alive." Cole's throat tightened. He turned to watch as Julia and Luke stepped into the light, their faces pale but alive. Julia clutched her son's hand as though the world might take him again if she loosened her grip. Her auburn hair was tangled, her clothes torn, but her eyes shone with something fierce and pure, hope reborn through pain. When she saw Cole, she ran to him, tears spilling freely. "They said you were hit!" she gasped. He smiled faintly. "Takes more than a few bullets to stop a shepherd." Then her gaze dropped, and she froze. Rook. The shepherd lay on a medic's stretcher nearby, his gray fur darkened by blood. One of his hind legs was gone, replaced by bandages thick as rope. His breathing was shallow but steady, his eyes half-lidded. When Julia knelt beside him, the dog opened one amber eye, tail giving a faint, slow wag. Cole crouched beside them, resting his good hand on Rook's head. "He made it," Cole said softly. "Toughest damn soul I've ever known." Ortiz approached, his voice quieter now. "We've got medevac coming in. He'll need surgery, so will you." "I'm not leaving him," Cole replied. An hour later, the compound was sealed off. Helicopters thundered overhead, lifting the rescued children out of the desert one by one. Ortiz barked orders into his comms, coordinating arrests across multiple states. Every name, every transaction, every officer linked to Dale Morgan's syndicate was being hunted down. Cole stood by the medevac chopper, watching Rook loaded gently inside. Julia came to him, Luke clinging to her side. "They're taking us to the hospital in Reno," she said. "They want to keep us under protection until this is over." He nodded. "That's good." Julia hesitated, then reached out to touch his arm. "Cole, I don't have words. You didn't just save Luke. You saved me. I was living afraid, running from ghosts. You ended that." Cole looked at her for a long moment. The desert wind lifted the ash from his jacket, scattering it into the sun. He smiled faintly, the kind that carried both sorrow and peace. "We're not heroes, Julia. We just did what had to be done." She shook her head, eyes shining. "Then thank God for people who do what has to be done." The chopper's rotors began to spin. Cole helped them aboard, then climbed in after Rook. The shepherd's head rested against his knee, tail twitching weakly with each vibration of the engine. The flight to Reno was silent except for the rhythmic hum of the blades and the faint beeping of medical monitors. When they reached the hospital, everything blurred. Lights, voices, painkillers, antiseptic smells. Cole's wounds were cleaned and stitched. The bullet that had grazed his arm had also cracked a rib. But he didn't care. His mind was on the operating room 2 doors away, where Rook's surgery was happening. Hours later, he limped down the sterile hallway, his arm in a sling. The room was quiet except for the steady beep of a monitor. Rook lay on a padded bed, wrapped in white bandages, one leg replaced by a clean dressing. The fur on his muzzle was still damp from surgery, but his eyes opened when Cole entered. For a moment, the dog tried to lift his head. Cole dropped to one knee, voice breaking. "Easy, boy. You're safe." Rook's ears twitched, and his tail thumped weakly against the bed. His gaze met Cole's, steady and warm. No fear, no pain, only trust. Cole smiled through the haze of exhaustion. "Mission accomplished," he whispered. The shepherd exhaled softly, his eyes fluttering shut again, but the faint wag of his tail said everything words couldn't. Julia appeared at the doorway, Luke beside her holding a stuffed bear the hospital staff had given him. They both watched in silence. Julia's voice came softly. "He's still fighting." "Always does," Cole murmured. She stepped closer, her hand brushing his shoulder. "You know, when you came out of nowhere on that road, I thought you were just another stranger, but now, every time I look at my son, I'll see you in that dog." Cole looked up, his blue-gray eyes weary but kind. "Don't see me, Julia. See the people worth saving. That's what he died for. That's what we all ride for." Julia's voice trembled. "You keep saying you're not a hero." He smiled faintly. "Heroes wear capes. We wear scars." Luke piped up shyly. "Are you going to get him a new leg?" Cole ruffled the boy's hair. "Yeah, kid. The best one money can buy." 3 days later, sunlight poured through the hospital blinds. Cole stood outside, his jacket clean now, the shepherd's insignia patched on the back again. Rook limped beside him on 3 legs, a temporary brace strapped to his stump. The dog's fur had been brushed, his collar replaced with a new one engraved with a single word: Survivor. Red and Diesel pulled up in a van, honking once. Red grinned from the driver's seat. "Figured you'd be itching to move again." Cole nodded. "You know me too well." Ortiz stood nearby, arms crossed. "You're lucky I still have a badge, Briggs. They're calling you the Desert Shepherds now. News crews want interviews. Politicians want statements." Cole smirked. "They can have the glory. We've got miles to ride." Ortiz extended his hand. "Whatever you call it, what you did here, it mattered." Cole shook his hand firmly. "Then make sure it stays that way. No more kids disappearing." Ortiz nodded. "Count on it." As the shepherds rode out, Julia and Luke stood by the hospital entrance, waving. Rook looked back once, his amber eyes catching the morning light, tail wagging gently. Cole turned the throttle, engines roaring in harmony with the desert wind. The sun broke fully over the horizon, washing everything in gold. Behind him, Rook's silhouette gleamed against the light. 1 soldier, 1 dog, 2 survivors moving toward another road, another dawn. A full year had passed since that night in the desert, the night when flames devoured the compound and redemption rose from ash. Nevada's sun still blazed the same, fierce and endless, but for Cole Briggs and the shepherds, life had shifted into something quieter, almost sacred. What once had been a life of chasing ghosts down lonely highways had turned into a mission rooted in the soil, a place of healing built for both man and beast. At the edge of a small town near Carson City stood Rook's Haven, a sprawling sanctuary surrounded by wooden fencing and golden fields. Once an abandoned ranch, now it thrived under the hands of people who had learned survival the hard way. A weathered sign swung at the gate, carved by Diesel himself. Rook's Haven, for those who still fight. Beneath the letters, a small emblem was painted, a shepherd's paw intertwined with a child's hand. Cole stood at the entrance that morning, his worn leather jacket replaced by a denim shirt rolled up at the sleeves. The scars across his forearm caught the sunlight, pale reminders of a night that would never fade. His beard had grown fuller, streaked with gray, and though his expression was the same, calm, unshakable, his eyes carried something gentler now. A sudden bark drew his attention. Rook limped across the courtyard, his 3 legs moving with surprising grace. The dog's fur had silvered around the muzzle, and a custom-made prosthetic brace gleamed where his hind leg used to be. A group of children followed him, laughing, tossing a ball that Rook caught proudly before dropping it at Luke's feet. Luke had grown taller, his once thin frame filling out with strength. At 13, he wore a small chain around his neck, a pendant shaped like a motorcycle wheel, given by Cole on his birthday. He crouched beside Rook, patting his head. "Good boy," he said softly. "You're faster than me, even with 3 legs." Julia watched from the porch. The desert wind caught her auburn hair, now cut shorter and lighter. She wore faded jeans, a white work shirt rolled to her elbows, and a gentle confidence that hadn't been there a year ago. Her smile carried warmth, the kind that only comes after long sorrow. She had become the heart of Rook's Haven, managing the rehabilitation program for both the dogs and the children who arrived bruised by the world. Red approached from the barn, wiping her hands on a rag. She'd traded her combat boots for work gloves, but her eyes were still sharp, her posture still ready for war if the world demanded it. "We've got 2 new rescues from the shelter," she said. "One's a Malinois, the other looks half wolf. Skinny as bones, but smart." Cole nodded. "We'll give them time." Diesel emerged next, his bald head gleaming in the sun, his usual scowl softened by the chaos of a dozen barking dogs. "Got the generator running," he grunted. "Solar's next week. Place'll be self-sufficient by summer." Julia smiled. "You said that last summer." Diesel smirked. "This time I mean it." The laughter came easily now. Even in the heat, even amid the barking and hammering, the ranch felt alive, a heartbeat pulsing beneath the wide desert sky. The shepherds had found purpose again, though none of them would have dared call it peace. Inside the main hall, the walls were covered with children's drawings, bright splashes of color that told stories too heavy for words. One stood out among them, a charcoal sketch by Luke. It showed a night scene, the desert burning, a pack of motorcycles racing through fire, and in the center Rook standing tall, head raised to the heavens. At the bottom, in messy handwriting, were the words, "Not all heroes walk on 2 legs." Cole often stopped before that picture, tracing the lines with his gaze. Each time, something inside him steadied. That afternoon, a visitor arrived, Agent Samuel Ortiz, still in his sharp gray suit, though his shoulders had softened, his smile warmer. He stepped out of his SUV, scanning the sanctuary with quiet pride. "Well, damn," he said. "You actually built it." Cole shook his hand. "You thought we'd just talk about it?" Ortiz grinned. "Most people do." He nodded towards the kennels. "Heard you're training rescue dogs for law enforcement." "Rescue and therapy," Julia added, joining them. "Some of these kids can't talk about what they've been through, but when they sit with the dogs, the silence doesn't hurt as much." Ortiz's gaze softened. "You turned pain into purpose, Cole. That's rarer than justice." Cole shrugged. "Justice is what you make of it. This is what's left after." They walked together along the corral, where Rook trotted slowly in the dust, his gait uneven but proud. A new puppy, all black fur and clumsy paws, chased after him, barking. Rook turned his head, patient as an old soldier training a recruit. Ortiz watched them and smiled. "Guess he's still on duty." Cole nodded. "He'll never retire." As the day waned, the sun bled into the horizon, turning the desert gold. Julia lit the lanterns around the yard while the children gathered for dinner. Simple food, laughter, and soft music from Red's old radio. The shepherds sat among them, passing bread and stories. It wasn't a family by blood, but it was one by survival. Later, when the stars came out, so many they seemed to press against the earth, Cole sat on the porch with Rook resting beside him. The night air carried the faint hum of cicadas and the distant roar of a passing truck. Rook's prosthetic clicked lightly when he shifted. Cole scratched behind his ear. "You did good, old friend," he said. "Better than any of us." Rook looked up, eyes reflecting the starlight, tail thumping once against the floor. Julia stepped onto the porch, carrying 2 mugs of coffee. She handed one to Cole, her gaze on the endless dark beyond the fences. "Do you ever miss it?" she asked. "The road?" Cole thought for a long moment. "Sometimes," he said finally. "But then I look at this place, at them, and I realize the road led here all along." She smiled faintly. "You really are a shepherd," he chuckled. "We all are." The next morning, as the sun climbed over the desert, the shepherds prepared for another ride. Diesel tuned the bikes while Red packed medical supplies. Ortiz stood by his car, watching with a faint smile. Julia and Luke waved from the gate, Rook sitting proudly beside them. Cole swung onto his Harley, the same battered machine that had carried him through war and fire. He glanced back once more at the sanctuary, the wooden sign, the children laughing, the dogs chasing shadows in the sand. Rook barked once, a sound clear and strong. Cole nodded, whispering, "Guard the home, soldier." Then the engines roared to life. One by one, the shepherds rolled out of Rook's haven, their silhouettes framed by the blazing dawn. The desert swallowed them whole, the echo of their engines fading into the horizon. Guardians of the lost, riders of the light. And above the gate, the sign gleamed beneath the morning sun, the words etched deep as a promise. Rook's Haven, where the light rests. In the quiet dawn of Rook's Haven, where the wounded found peace and the lost found purpose, one truth stood clear. Miracles do not always arrive in blinding light or thunder from the heavens. Sometimes they come on 3 legs, with scars that tell stories, and eyes that still trust after everything. God works through those willing to carry the broken, to protect the small, to choose mercy over indifference. Every act of kindness, no matter how small, is a whisper of His grace in a weary world. If this story touched your heart, share it with someone who believes in second chances. Leave a comment, subscribe, and let these tales of faith and redemption keep spreading light. May God bless and protect all who walk this road with love and courage.